When you grow up in a military family, there's a certain pressure to join up yourself when you come of age. My grandpa served in World War II, my dad in Vietnam, and we bled red, white and blue in the name of freedom. I've since changed my views on things like that. But hey, can't do much to change the past. I ended up signing up for service in my junior year of high school, getting training out of the way in the summer between junior and senior year so I could get that out of the way. This was back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, so the military was all about throwing people all over the world. My first was in Germany. Then I got a little bit of time in Guam. But my last deployment before getting out was in Japan. Ended up in the Kanagawa prefecture. Super nice place, good access to the city and the mountains not too far away. It was amazing to get leave for a couple of days and go hiking with a couple of friends. The city was pretty nice too. And God, the food. Everything was so fresh, it made coming back to food in the States feel like I was eating field rations all the time. It was so cheap too. Except, Japan had a little more of a sinister side to it, especially when the sun set. I learned from a few locals working on base when I got there that some weird shit happens on occasion, and just to roll with it and act as normal as possible. Hell, a couple of them recommended I visit a shrine and just make a prayer offering. I heeded their advice about 2 weeks later, after my first couple of encounters. Thank fuck the first thing I ran into was one of the more harmless spirits. I was still in my mid-20s at the time, and not out of my partying days quite yet. Ever been to a karaoke room? They're fun as hell, and the alcohol is usually included or super cheap. Get a few friends, have a few drinks, sing a few songs with the passion of Freddie Mercury without realizing you sound more like Yoko Ono, and have a good laugh. Now, with the amount of alcohol included, it was very understandable that we got wasted. Don't think we finished up until maybe 1:30 that morning, stumbling out in search of food before hitting home. There are a ton of all-night places around, which helps a lot, but I was too tired to really care about food. Luckily, it was super easy to get anywhere in the city while you're totally sloshed, thanks to the rail system and everything. I told the others I was going to head back home, making my way back to the little apartment I was set up in for housing. A couple of train rides, and I was at the nearest station, just a few blocks away, enough to walk in probably 30 minutes, considering I was still hobbling a little. Maybe halfway there, on a particularly dark street, I saw a figure standing about 10 meters away. They were small, facing the same direction I was heading, so I could only see the back of their bald head. The gown it was wearing looked like the robes a monk wears, so my drunk mind immediately went to, oh, little monk, wonder if he's lost. Look, I know the US teaches us to be cautious of people on the streets, especially at night. But after living in other countries, you learn that people aren't nearly as violently out to get you as in America. It was pretty common here for young kids to travel alone on trains, walk the streets, and even run errands for their parents. Bad things still happen, obviously, but most people were a lot more respectful of other human beings at least. So seeing a little kid alone on the street around 2 in the morning, I figured they might need some help finding home. There was a police station down the road, so I approached the kid. The nearest street light at the intersection flickered, casting us into darkness for a moment. In the absence of light, I saw a small blue light the kid was holding. As I got closer, I finally spoke up. "Hey there, are you lost? Do you need help?" I said, louder than intended. The kid didn't respond, and it took me a second to realize I was speaking English, so they might not understand. Look, I'm not too smart when I've had a few drinks, so I decided to try again. Even in my broken-ass Japanese, the southern accent I still couldn't shake from being born and raised in South Georgia wasn't a huge help. "Konnichiwa?" Shit. What's the word for lost? Ushinita? No, that's not it. Shit. Oh, Ushinata? The kid finally turned toward me after I got the words out. The little blue light it was holding grew brighter as it turned, illuminating their face. It looked normal for the most part, like a regular kid. But instead of eyes, there was one singular eye, massive in the middle of their face. That single eye was staring me down now, but I couldn't move despite my brain screaming at me to get the hell out of there. My legs turned to jelly, giving out underneath me as I fell to the ground, barely catching myself before my head hit the concrete. I still couldn't move while the thing shuffled toward me, blue light oppressing me even further as I sunk to the ground, trying to look up at the thing. Something I will never forget. God, typing it out makes it come back. I can still feel it. The thing leaning down toward me on the ground, looking me right in the eye, and licking my cheek up to my temple. The tongue was scaly, with little points coming off of it that scraped roughly against my skin. I had just shaved that morning, making it feel even worse, closer to me. It was like a cat licking, but more slimy, while still being rough against every patch of flesh it could reach. This little shit licked me, stood up, looked me in the eye, and walked away like nothing fucking happened. I couldn't move, heart racing trying to figure out if I was just sloshed and assaulted by some weirdo on the street, or thinking that what I saw was some kind of ghost. After a few minutes, my strength returned, finally able to stand up and make my way back to the barracks. I couldn't fall asleep the entire night. Almost took a scouring pat to my cheek to try and get rid of the feeling it left on my skin. It was driving me fucking insane. I must have looked like a wreck the next day. Not too surprised. A couple of the guys from the karaoke the night before must have noticed too. I was sitting with a few of them in the mess hall, stirring spirals into my soup absent-mindedly. "You alright?" Matt, another soldier, asked. "Look like you've seen a ghost." I said, taking a minute to shake the fuck out of my brain. "You ever sobered up from being absolutely ripped without a nap? It sucks. Like, sucks." "Might have, to be honest." "Oh, who did you run into?" Ryuu, a local working with us on base, asked. He was dozing off just moments before, but suddenly he was fully awake, a look of concern on his face. I don't really know. I thought it was a kid at first. Like I could only see them from behind. Bald, wearing monk robes. I asked them if they were lost. Then it's like, I don't know, like, I just suddenly collapsed. I couldn't stay on my feet. Then it looked at me. The thing had one eye. I said, babbling on and still stirring my soup. When I was on the ground though, it licked me. I don't know, man. I feel kind of violated. Ryuu snorted, Matt and I unsure of what was happening as it began to turn into full-throated laughter. "You got lucky. Hitosume Kozo, Cyclops children," he said, still laughing. "They're harmless, though they can be, well, weird, as you experienced. Could have been worse." "Sorry? Worse? It gets worse than being licked by a dwarf Cyclops?" Matt asked. "Gonna need the lowdown here, boss." "Oh yeah, yokai can be very dangerous if you come across the right ones. You heard of the Kuchisake Onna?" Ryuu asked, leaning forward. "There was an airman a while back, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. They covered his death as a for his family. It was the Kuchisake Onna though, the slit-mouthed woman." "Nope, don't like the sound of that," Matt said, turning away. "You should take warning," Ryuu said again. "If you run into a woman hiding the lower half of her face, you found the Kuchisake Onna. She'll ask you if you think she's pretty." "Should I also ask her on a date?" Matt asked, snorting at his own joke. Ryuu only gave him a tired side eye, used to his shitty jokes by now. "You can't run away immediately. She'll take that as calling her ugly. Tell her she's pretty, then she'll show you the lower half of her face, mouth cut." He made a motion from one ear down across his mouth, all the way back up to the other side, into a huge grin. She'll ask you the question again. Tell her she's not pretty, she kills you with huge scissors. Tell her she's pretty, she'll slice you just like her. They found that airman with his mouth slit. So you're just screwed either way? That's shitty, I said, thinking back to last night. That was already awful enough. I didn't want to run into more. I just felt gross, my skin tingling again with the feeling of being licked. The best method for getting away from a yokai is to confuse it. This goes for a lot of them, from Kuchisake Onna to Akamanto. Ask them a question in return, and you'll have time to run. Ryu looked us both in the eyes now, like a command to take him seriously. There are others to just avoid entirely. Run into some of the more vile ones, and you'll be, well, as Americans say, fucked. Cool, never leaving the base again, I guess, I said, practically slamming my face into my soup. Guess since I saw one, I'm going to be cursed? No, not really. Just go to a shrine and make an offering. It's easy enough, but does wonders for protection, Ryu said. Most are just restless spirits that couldn't move on. Offering a prayer for them can often make them ignore you or just give you enough luck to avoid them. We chatted a little longer, Ryu telling us about various local legends before we all split off back to work. I ended up getting swamped with work for the next week, unable to get a moment to breathe, much less get off base. Eventually, the incident kind of got left behind. I think I rationalized to myself that I was drunk and just imagined it or had a weird encounter. Should have remembered. Finally got a night off a week later. Decided to go out and get some decent food other than the mess hall. So I went out on the town. Despite my plans to be back before it was too late and the roads were deserted, I got caught up talking to a girl I met. She was nice. I still have her number and we talk from time to time. Dated for a little while. But that was beside the point. By the time I started back home, it was past midnight. That said, this time I was totally sober, so I had that going for me at least. I was also closer to the base, so the walk was much shorter than last time. Sounds like an easy trip, right? I walked her home and started back on my way. About a block away, I heard a woman calling my name from behind me. Thomas? I thought it was the girl, maybe inviting me back to her house, since it was late. Would have been much better that way. Instead, I turned around and locked eyes with her. A tall woman, a long kimono covering down to her feet and a paper fan over her face, was standing just a few meters away, studying me. I almost fell back, instinct telling me to run before I stopped myself, thinking back to what Ryu had said. She kept the fan up over her face, approaching me slowly, gliding over the ground like she was floating under the kimono. Am I pretty? She asked, still staring deep into my eyes. I couldn't look away, no matter how hard I tried. Dark hair spilled down the sides of her face, big green eyes glowing while she stared me down. She was beautiful. Yes, very, I said, almost compelled to say it. She let out a giggle, eyes lighting up even more. The paper fan started to close. A massive pair of scissors forming from the thin wooden edges. They glowed in the dim lights of the street. But that was secondary to what I saw now. Am I still pretty? She queried me again, smiling literally from ear to ear. I could see her teeth and jaws on both sides, split skin folding back from the mouth. Bright red blood was glistening around the cuts, as if they were freshly made. Her smile was making me uneasy. Trying to think of a way out of this to confuse her, or even just to run, she reiterated again. Am I still pretty? Am I pretty? I said, unable to think of anything but the question asked of me. Immediately regretted that, closing my eyes tight and preparing to get murdered by a fucking ghost. God, what a way to go. Are "You pretty?" she asked, white smile now contorted by a frown in the middle. Blood gushed from the slits as her face furrowed quizzically. Her hand holding the scissors lowered, her eyes finally breaking from mine as she looked to the sky pondering. "Are you pretty? Are men pretty?" Once she looked away, it was like a weight was lifted. I ran, finally making it back to the base gate where the guards were a little unwilling to let me in because I was so scared. That scared the hell out of me though. Didn't sleep again that night. Called in the next day and told my CO I was sick with food poisoning. I marched my ass to the nearest shrine and gave 2 offerings to whatever spirits wanted it. I was barely in Japan for a month so far. 2 of these creepy spirits had already found me. I took every precaution I could from then on. Hell, I still had over a year at least for deployment at this point. After what Ryu told me, I did some research too. Know your enemy, right? Yeah, yokai don't play by the same rules as other ghost legends. These things could be pure evil, just hate in the most distilled form. Some didn't give a damn about any offerings or charms. Despite my newfound caution, it's like I was a freaking magnet for weird shit over there. Things were only going to get weirder until I finally got to leave. After the run-in with Kuchisake Onna, I took things a lot more seriously. If I was out at night, I tried sticking to more populated areas and be home before midnight. And even then, I made a weekly visit to the nearby shrine and tried to do offerings to cover my ass when possible. It worked for a couple of months too, though I did make it a point to look into some of the more common yokai, just on the off chance I ran into any. Turns out that even the most well-lit public places can be dangerous when it comes to spirits, no matter how safe you're trying to be. One of the most terrifying things about yokai is that they simply do not give a flying fuck about where they show up. It was around October maybe. I had gone out for a nice dinner with Hikaru, the girl I'd been seeing since my last encounter. It was nice. Walked through one of the parks at sunset, spending some nice time together. She was teaching me Japanese, so I was able to finally understand and conversate a little, but nothing beyond ordering at the restaurant usually. Either way, I was really falling for this girl, spending most of my time off base with her when I could. Maybe around 11, I walked her back home. A little kiss goodnight. Then it was off to the train station to get back to base. Sounds easy enough. And I was in a pretty good mood after a nice date night, relaxing and having a couple of drinks. The subway was a lot more empty than I expected, with the train platform totally empty by the time I got there. 10 minutes on the screen until mine got there, so I took a seat on one of the benches to wait. Pretty sure I started drifting off, the silence and flickering lights of the train station lulling me to sleep. Scraping sounds made me jump back up with a start, thinking my train had finally made it. Looking up at the screen though, there was still 5 minutes left on the arrival counter. The scraping was still going though, like something dragging along the rocks lining the tracks below. I got up to see, wondering if maybe someone fell onto the tracks while I was asleep. It wouldn't be the first time someone had tried killing themselves with one of the trains out here. Hopefully, that wasn't the case, and it was just a drunken accident or something. I approached the edge of the platform, cautiously standing back before leaning forward to see the source. The scraping sound grew louder, like it was trying to rush along the ground much faster than before. Getting close, I didn't even see anything over the edge, before a hand came up over the edge, grasping the concrete platform before another joined it. The fingers were bloody, scarlet shining bright against the pale white skin. A mess of dark black hair followed slowly behind, pulling itself up from the tracks toward me. Look, I may have been kinda stupid during my last run-ins, but I watched The Ring and The Grudge to know that pale girls with messy long hair are a fucking problem. Needless to say, I started stepping back fast, desperately trying to get away. The scraping sound got louder as she heaved herself onto the platform, long fingernails clawing at the clean cement, making terrible sounds. It looked at me, dark black eyes from pupil to edge, mouth wide in a silent scream. When she was fully on the platform, I could see the source of the dragging noise. Her body ended around her abdomen, jagged bones sticking out of still bloody insides as she crawled forward on her elbows and hands. The protruding bones scraped the concrete below, making the awful scraping noise and leaving a bloody trail. God, as it grew louder, it sounded like nails on a chalkboard mixing with a train running off the rails. My head was pounding, getting dizzy just listening to it. I finally got my body to move, running toward the other end of the platform and the small guard station at the top of the stairs there. I had seen an older guy when I came through, though he didn't look like he was in the mood to help. Hopefully, he would make exceptions when it comes to yokai. Despite being somewhat in shape, I am the opposite of fast, so blowing out of the platform, I hit speeds previously unknown to man. I could hear the scraping behind me as I flew by, desperately hoping to at least reach the stairs that might slow her down. Nope. I did a classic mistake when up against weird shit, and I looked behind me after hearing the sound of scraping metal join the ruckus. This bitch was on my damn heels, a huge scythe held in one hand now, but walking along on her hands faster than a goddamn circus performer. I might have been propelled further by the adrenaline, especially because her face was more clear now, frozen in a disfigured scream of shock, anguish, and tormented pain that I'll never get out of my mind. As she got closer, she switched to hopping along on one arm, raising the scythe to cut me down to her size. Maybe it was the offering I had done a couple of days before, but I think something was looking out for me as I finally reached the steps, bracing myself for the inevitable trip and fall. I launched myself toward them, trying to clear the first few. It worked, miraculously, and her swing with the scythe went under my feet as I landed 3 steps up, grasping the rail. Even with my newfound luck, I had to keep running, legs and lungs both burning by now as I rushed further up the steps. It finally happened. I knew my luck wouldn't last for long, but barely 2 further up the stairs, and I tripped, smashing my face on the edge of one of the concrete steps. It dazed me hardcore, and I could barely get my vision back as I struggled back up, blood now gushing from my nose. All I could smell was blood. But the persistent sound of the yokai was gaining on me. I could hear the scraping turn to tapping behind me, getting louder as she pulled herself up the steps behind me. The jagged bones would drag up, before flopping onto the next step, gushing blood from the exposed insides on her abdomen every time it was pushed in. The sound alone made me want to throw up, but the trail of bright red viscera behind her was something else to see. The train tracks behind her were glowing in the fluorescent lights above, looking more like fires of hell with every second. There was no getting back up, my head entirely fucked and barely able to realize which way was up. All I could do was clamber back on hands and knees, pushing myself further up the stairs as she crawled behind. For a moment, we made eye contact, making me stop in my tracks as something burned into my mind. It wasn't my memory, but I saw it like I was living it. A bunch of girls, just kids, pointing and laughing at me, telling me that my parents didn't even want me, so why should they? I was never going to contribute to society anyway, especially not since I was already one of the kids forgotten to the system. It's pointless anyway, all this school I've been going through, only to get scolded by the teacher for being stupid, while the other kids just laughed at me. They were right. I should contribute to the people around me in the way that would serve them best. My vision flashed away, now standing right in front of the same platform we were at, looking at the speeding train hitting my way fast. One light was on the front, warm and welcoming, as I started walking closer to the edge. The conductor blew the train horn, though I'm not sure if he saw me. It would be too late if he did, because I stepped off right before the train came barreling into the station. I could feel the force of the train and wind as it knocked me back onto the train platform. As my vision faded, I looked back to where the train was stopped now, doors open and people pouring out on their daily commute. On the floor looking up at all the people who would be better off without me. My vision faded as my last view was the jagged remains of my spine jutting from where my waist should be. The train came screeching into the station, bringing me back from the terrible vision being forced through to me. More than fear, I was in despair now, tears stinging my eyes and broken nose as they trailed down. She was gone. No trail of blood or scraping sound in sight other than the train grinding against tracks, slowing to a halt. I ran even faster than I had running away from her, diving right through the train doors and past the crowd waiting to exit as soon as they opened. Can't say I blame them for giving out a little scream and fleeing, because I probably looked like a murder victim running from hell right then. Cowering in the seat of the train car, I kept an eye on everything around me, waiting for her inevitable reappearance to take me just like she was taken. There was no other person sitting in the car. A younger guy dressed in casual clothes, wearing a baseball cap. He would side-eye me occasionally, though I wasn't paying him any mind. Despite everything though, all I could feel for her was sadness. She scared the shit out of me, sure. But from the research I had done on Onryo, she's a lost spirit. Even after running into the slit-mouthed woman before, the teke-teke is still one of the most terrifying encounters I've had. When I finally left the station, I caught a glimpse of what I think helped me get out alive. The guy in the baseball cap left the station in front of me, walking in the same direction outside. I wasn't far behind him, still stuck in my own little world when he looked back at me, giving a small whistle in a wave, before suddenly disappearing. Like, there and gone. Split second, with a tiny bit of smoke or vapor hanging in the air where he was. Through the smoke, I saw a little creature scurry off toward the nearby trees, leaping in and disappearing, just like the guy. Back in the States, I would have thought it was a raccoon running off from the bushes. I couldn't place the damn thing, and didn't for another few months until I was out camping with Hikaru and a few of her friends. Out in the mountains, surrounded by trees, Hikaru and I were hiking a little ways from the camp to find some alone time, if you get what I mean. A little family of the same creature I saw came running out of the brush a little ahead of us on the trail. 3 Tanuki, raccoon dogs, ran out and looked right at us before ducking back off into the brush. Hikaru made the loudest squeal I'd ever heard. A huge smile on her face as they ran off before telling me all about how people thought they were legends at one time. Apparently, seeing them was pretty rare, and even though they're mischievous little shits, they're usually signs of good luck. So despite all the terrifying things I've run into, at least I can say I've got a little bit of luck on my side. Unfortunately, that luck would only go so far, and we stopped going camping a few months later. It was summertime when we went camping again, taking advantage of the beautiful mountain weather to go up with just a couple of friends. Me, Hikaru, Matt, and another newly arrived soldier named Jacob. We went up into the mountains on a Friday afternoon, everyone having requested leave weeks ago to stay up there until Sunday evening. We drove out to one of the mountain roads, parking off on the side and unloading the car, tents, cooking supplies, and a decent amount of alcohol for a couple of nights out in the mountain air was exactly what we had all needed. Hikaru and I were starting to get a little serious too, and I was thinking about popping the question. Not marriage, of course, but if she would like to either move back to the States with me, or if I should stay here when my deployment ended. I was ready to get out of this life, take a cushy job in the private sector, and put what I knew to use. I really liked her though, and wanted her with me. The path to our camping spot passed by an old Shinto shrine in the woods, though nobody was there. Hikaru and myself walked in to do a prayer and offering to the kami of the land, while Matt followed suit out of obligation, or superstition I guess. I had told him about my experiences even after the talk with Ryu, but he still thought I was egging him on and just fucking with him. Jacob turned his nose up at the idea of offering a prayer to the mountain spirits, saying he didn't believe in hokey shit like that. First mistake he made that weekend. When we got to the campsite, I was honestly ready to beat the shit out of Matt for bringing this kid along. He was a dick to the highest degree and just negative about every damn thing that happened. Even worse, I saw him go through at least 3 different snacks we had packed for this day, and he threw every bit of trash off to the side. After we set everything up, I asked Hikaru if she wanted to go for a walk, doubling back and picking up the trash he left along the mountainside. "He's kind of annoying," she said when we were far enough away from the camp. "You're telling me? I don't know if Matt's going to leave him out here in the woods at this point. Maybe we should set up our own campfire, huh?" I winked at her, making her blush and turn away. We got all the trash we found, tossing it in a recycling bin near the main road and heading back to camp. When we got there, it was not ideal. Matt was trying to set up his tent, while Jacob was making a general mess of things, pulling all of our supplies out with no rhyme or reason and scattering them around the clearing. Eventually, Matt got his tent up, nudging Jacob and grabbing a couple of the fishing poles we had brought along. They headed down to the river, hoping to catch our dinner before the sun started to set. Hikaru and I stayed back, getting a fire ready and prepping other parts of dinner, plus getting our tent situated. We were both sitting in the tent, cuddled together and talking as the light grew dim outside, when Matt came running back, screaming through the trees. "Go! We have to go!" he shouted, tearing through toward our tent and bursting in without any notice. Jacob came tearing up behind him, screaming his lungs out in fear, before tripping over some of the shit he had scattered when emptying out his pack. "The hell is wrong with y'all?" I said, pushing my way out of the tent and stumbling to stand up. Matt was pointing to the edge of the clearing, the same direction they had just come from, where the sounds of something dragging itself along the ground was coming closer. Trees were shaking, heavy thumps punctuating the dragging sounds. As it got even closer, a tense rattling sound like wind chimes knocking together grew nearer, clacking harder with each huge thud. I was having a damned flashback to the subway station at this point, hearing the sounds of the tick-a-tick's bones scraping across the concrete. Hikaru stepped out behind me, looking off in the same direction. We were frozen in place when the perpetrator burst through the tree line. I shit you not, this thing was a massive crawling skeleton. No, it was a skeleton made up of hundreds of smaller ones, skulls and bones forming together to make one giant abomination that was now making its way towards us, faster and faster. Every single mouth on the thing was open, a raspy chorus of screams echoing forth as it made its way closer. "Run!" Hikaru said, grabbing my hand and going back to the direction of the car. We hauled ass, tearing through trees and brush while getting cut by stray branches. The thing kept screaming, rampaging further and further toward us as it reached out massive, bony fingers to claw its way forward in the dirt. It was gaining fast, with the car still at least a couple of miles ahead of us out on the road. "Shit, Matt!" I screamed, remembering probably the most important thing. "Where are the damn keys?" He stuck his hand up. "I got them, just run!" Jacob was screeching his damned head off behind us, the closest one to getting overtaken by the creature. Hikaru was making better speed than I was, with her just a few feet ahead of me and Matt leading the pack. The rattling got louder, the skull amalgamation shaking with jaws open in another screech, every single face on it echoing as they glowed in the pale moonlight above. It made the dark sockets of their eyes even more hollow, deep pools of black death that wanted us to join them. "Is there any way we can get rid of this thing?" I was shouting through labored gasps. I hadn't had the misfortune of running into anything in months. Now, I was going to get flattened by a damned Halloween decoration in the middle of the mountains. "The shrine!" Hikaru shouted, pointing at the dim light of a lantern hanging down from it nearby. I don't know who came by to light it since we had been away, but thank God they did. As we got closer, Jacob started screaming louder, the rattling speeding up in turn. We finally made it, Matt ducking in first with Hikaru and I right behind. She pulled me in behind her, almost slamming me back into the wall. Jacob tripped as he went up the low stairs, falling right on his face before the doors to enter. Matt stepped forward, trying to help him by grabbing his arm. Even as he pulled Jacob in, something stopped the younger man from getting past the threshold. "God, please, no, please!" He was screaming at us, right there on the edge of the door with only thin air between, but unable to cross. The mass of bones suddenly swung a hand forward, stabbing right through his torso with two long, sharp bony fingers. It skewered him as he begged for help, voice fading as it lifted Jacob to its mouth, popping him in like candy. The three of us could only scream, trying to push back to the furthest reaches of the shrine in hopes that it couldn't get through the door to us. "Kasha dokuro," Hikaru said, breathless next to me. "They can't be killed. We just have to try and wait until it gets bored. Maybe it will leave if it can't get us." Our hopes that it couldn't get in were confirmed. A bony hand reaching toward the door, only to get repelled back with a flash of light. The Kasha dokuro stayed out on the path, pulling itself up to level one huge empty eye socket right at the doorway, staring in at us with every small skull dotting it, smiling toothy grins. It was going to try and wait us out, knowing that we couldn't go anywhere. It eventually let out another raspy scream, blowing hot breath through the doorway and blasting us with the stench of death. Hikaru and I held each other, trying to shrink back from the atrocious smell. But nothing helped. Matt was cowering in a corner, crying and begging for help from whatever god might be out there. The Kasha dokuro was getting impatient though, every angry spirit that it was made of crying out for nourishment and blood. One long skeletal arm raised into the air, preparing to smash down on top of the shrine and just get rid of the barrier. We braced ourselves, eyes closed and crying as we expected to be crushed to death. Instead, the rattling started in earnest, only to be cut off by a heavy thump, something crashing to the ground beside the shrine instead. I opened my eyes just in time to hear the Kasha dokuro scream again and get hit with the deathly odor before it started rattling faster, making its way back down the path from where it had come from. Standing in front of the shrine now, the huge skeletal arm clutched in one hand with a huge paper fan in the other, was a huge man with small wings on his back. As he turned, I caught sight of hardened eyes, exuding seriousness over a long pointed nose on its red face. "Kami," Hikaru said under her breath as she stared in wonder. The man waved his fan, disappearing into the night with a gust of wind and taking the arm with him. Just like that, the terror that was only feet away had come to pass. Our lives saved by an unknown guardian. We went back to the car, because hell with staying out there when we just saw a damned giant skeleton eat a man in one bite. There was no way we were staying to figure out if the yokai would come back. Not like Command was going to believe us when we told him any of this. Matt and I made up a story on the way back, Hikaru nodding along and putting it all to memory. Jacob started getting drunk, more and more of an asshole. And when Matt finally told him off, he got pissy and huffed off into the woods. Haven't seen him since. Command got the local authorities out for a search and rescue operation along the mountain, but the most they found was his fishing rod, still thrown aside down by the stream. That was my last encounter while I was there, thankfully. We stopped camping after that, even with the aid of what I came to find out was a Tengu, a guardian deity for different regions. I wasn't eager to face a giant skeleton again anytime soon. We went back to base, and I kind of just absorbed into myself. Hikaru and I drifted apart over time, even though we still keep up as friends. It just didn't end up working out. She had family here she didn't want to leave, and I had about enough of getting nearly killed by ghosts. Briefly, we talked about moving off to another prefecture, but that idea just wasn't meant to be. So, after about a month, we just agreed to break it off clean. That was that, I guess. Matt wasn't well after what happened. I don't know, maybe I'm more open, considering I had a more tame run-in with my first yokai. Maybe he just wasn't able to handle the ramifications of what this could mean. Dude grew up a pretty hardcore Christian, so I can't imagine seeing a behemoth skeleton did a lot for his faith in Jesus. They eventually gave him a medical discharge, though I'm not really sure where he's ended up since. I moved back to the States after deployment was over. Still here now, doing my own thing. On occasion, I still have nightmares about my run-ins, and even the slightest of scraping sounds makes me paranoid that Teke might be nearby again, finally coming to finish the job. I don't know if it helps, since I'm back over here, but I've taken to doing small offerings. It gives me some comfort, at least, despite the terrors that keep coming back into my mind. Sometimes, I think about going back to visit. I've even started talking to Hikaru again, catching up after nearly a decade apart, and seeing how both our lives have changed. She's talking about coming to visit the States soon, wondering if I might be open to showing her the sights. Who knows? Maybe I still have some of the luck from that Tanuki hanging around.